Without telling Lauren, I packed the kids into the car and drove straight to San Diego. She was there for what she called a 3-day business trip, and I decided, on the surface, to make it a fun surprise for the weekend. Beneath that, though, there was a restless itch in the back of my mind I couldn't quite ignore. Something about the past few weeks had felt off. The drive itself was long enough to let my thoughts wander but short enough to stop me from overthinking. Ellie, my 9-year-old, sat in the back humming along to whatever played on the radio, while Jake, 16 and eternally attached to his earbuds, scrolled on his phone. I tried to match Ellie's enthusiasm, pointing out landmarks, making up silly road trip games, but my mind kept circling back to Lauren. She had been harder to reach lately. Little things at first. Phone calls going unanswered, texts returned hours later with clipped replies. Sorry, swamped at work, becoming her catchphrase. I wanted to believe her. I told myself people go through busy spells. But then there were the other things, the sudden deactivation of our shared location access. Nights where her fitness tracker showed activity spikes well past midnight despite her telling me she'd gone to bed early. And those rideshare receipts to the waterfront when she claimed she was at the office. By the time we reached the hotel's curved driveway, I had convinced myself that whatever doubts I had were probably overblown. Still, as I parked and helped the kids out, I could feel that strange undercurrent in my chest. The lobby was bright and modern, smelling faintly of citrus and polished wood. Behind the front desk, a young woman with a neat ponytail greeted me with the kind of rehearsed warmth that belongs in a training manual. Welcome, sir. Checking in? Yes, I said, giving my name. We're actually surprising my wife. She's here on business. Thought we'd make a weekend out of it. She tapped at her keyboard, her smile never fading. Oh, how nice. Let's see, yes, we have your reservation. You'll be on the same floor as Mrs. Carter. She hesitated for just half a second before adding, her room is booked for double occupancy, so you're all set for. I froze for just long enough to notice my own pause. Double occupancy? I repeated, trying to keep my tone light. Yes, she said, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. Would you like adjoining rooms, or? No, I interrupted, forcing a small laugh. This is fine. She slid the key cards across the counter. Room 415. Elevators are to your right. As I led the kids toward the elevators, the words double occupancy clung to me like static. I told myself there could be a dozen explanations, clerical errors, company policy, anything, but each possible answer felt thinner than the last. The elevator chimed, and we stepped inside. Jake leaned against the wall, eyes on his phone. Ellie clutched her stuffed rabbit and asked if Mom would be surprised to see us. I smiled and told her she would, though even I could hear how unconvincing I sounded. When the elevator doors slid open, we stepped into a carpeted hallway muffled and quiet, save for the distant hum of an ice machine. I counted down the numbers until we reached 417, our room, just 2 doors down from hers. As we passed 415, I slowed without meaning to. Outside her door stood a room service cart. On its tray sat 2 wine glasses, one still with a trace of deep red in the bottom, and 2 plates with crumbs and streaks of sauce. A faint aroma of grilled fish hung in the air, mingled with something richer, maybe chocolate. From behind the door, I caught the sound of a man's voice, muffled but undeniably male. I couldn't make out the words, only the low cadence of speech. My stomach tightened. Dad! Ellie's voice snapped me back. Is this ours? She was already trying the handle of 417. I shook my head quickly, pushing our key card into the slot and opening the door. The kids tumbled inside, Ellie exploring immediately, Jake dropping onto one of the beds without a word. I stood in the doorway for a moment longer, glancing back toward 415. The hallway was empty. I shut our door gently, the click sounding louder than it should have. Not 5 minutes later, there was a soft knock. I opened it to see Lauren standing there. She was already changed into casual clothes, jeans and a light sweater, and her hair was freshly styled. She blinked at me in surprise, then gave a quick laugh that felt practiced. Wow, no warning? She said, stepping forward to hug me. Her arms felt warm, familiar, but something about the embrace was brief, almost perfunctory. "Wanted to surprise you," I said, pulling back to see her expression. She glanced past me at the kids, smiling. "You did? Oh my gosh. Look at you too. Ellie, you've gotten taller. Jake, wow, you're practically grown." She didn't mention the room service cart outside her door. Didn't ask if I'd seen it. Didn't explain the voice I'd heard. Instead, she launched into small talk about how busy her schedule was, how packed her day had been with client meetings. When Ellie asked if she could see Mom's room, Lauren chuckled and said it was a mess. Just papers everywhere. Then she shifted the topic back to us. How sweet it was that we'd driven all the way down. How she wished she'd had time to prepare for our arrival. The facts sat between us like stones. The cart, the glasses, the plates, the voice. She avoided them effortlessly, steering the conversation into safer waters. I found myself going along with it, nodding, smiling when appropriate, even though my mind was still back in that hallway. At some point, she excused herself, saying she had to make a quick call before dinner. We watched her walk away, her steps brisk, her phone already in her hand. Inside our room, Jake put his phone down long enough to glance at me. His expression wasn't accusing, but it wasn't neutral either. 16 is old enough to notice things. I told myself I'd deal with that later. Right then, I just sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped together, and tried to convince myself that the pieces I'd been collecting in my head for weeks weren't starting to fit together. About half an hour after Lauren left, Ellie realized she'd left her favorite blanket, thin, faded, and covered in cartoon whales, somewhere in the car. We went down together to retrieve it, and on the way back up, she stopped outside Lauren's door. "Can I give it to Mom?" she asked. "She'll want to see it." It wasn't true, but it gave me an idea. "Sure," I said. "Why don't you head back to our room, and I'll drop it off for you. You can surprise her with it tomorrow morning." Ellie didn't question it. She skipped off toward 417, blanketless, trusting me to deliver it. Jake was inside scrolling his phone again by the time I returned to the hallway, the blue light reflecting off his face. I closed our door softly and stood there for a moment, holding that old blanket like it was a prop in a play I hadn't rehearsed for. I walked the few steps to 415. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. I raised my hand to knock, lightly so it could still pass as casual, when the door opened from the inside. A man stepped out, mid-30s, maybe older. Dark hair, sleeves rolled halfway up as he buttoned his cuffs with quick, practiced movements. He looked up at me, surprised but not startled, the kind of look you give when you weren't expecting anyone but also aren't afraid of being caught. "Evening," he said, voice steady. I managed to nod, my mouth dry. He stepped past me into the hallway without waiting for a reply, walking toward the elevators. His cologne lingered, something expensive, sharp but fading quickly. Inside the room, I could see enough without stepping over the threshold. 2 towels hanging on the rack in the open bathroom door, 2 toothbrushes side by side on the counter, a pair of conference passes on the table, each on its own lanyard, and on the desk a folded bill from the hotel clearly marked for double occupancy. The bed was neatly made, but there was a slight indentation on one side, like someone had been sitting there just minutes earlier. A room service tray, similar to the one I'd seen in the hallway earlier, sat pushed against the wall, now empty except for a single napkin. Lauren appeared from the bathroom, her hair slightly damp, her expression flickering just long enough to register my presence. Then she smiled, calm, measured, as if this was just another ordinary interruption. "Oh hey, what's up?" she asked, stepping toward me. I held up the blanket. "Ellie left this in the car. Thought you might want to give it to her later." She took it with a small laugh, the sound breezy but without real warmth. "Thanks. I'll bring it by in the morning." She didn't ask why I hadn't knocked sooner. She didn't mention the man who had just left. She didn't seem concerned at all that I might have seen the toothbrushes, the passes, the bill. "I've got to head out in a bit," she said, setting the blanket on the bed. "Client dinner. Shouldn't be too late." In the presence of the children, when she came by later, she said only that her schedule was hectic, promised breakfast together the next day, and talked about a possible trip to the zoo. Ellie stayed cheerful, hanging on her every word. Jake was quieter, glancing between us, absorbing more than either of us wanted to admit. I focused on keeping the evening light for them. We took a walk down to the waterfront, letting the salty breeze and the sound of the waves distract us. Ellie pointed out street performers. Jake took pictures of the skyline. I tried to match their energy, but every step felt heavier than the last. Back in the room, once they were asleep, Ellie curled up with her blanket, Jake sprawled sideways across his bed. I let my mind replay everything. The man's calm exit, the toothbrushes, the conference passes, the unshaken way Lauren carried herself, as if she had already rehearsed this scene in her head and knew exactly how to play her part. In the quiet, the pieces I'd been collecting for weeks slid into place like parts of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. The sudden deactivation of our shared location. The late-night activity spikes on her fitness tracker. The rideshare receipts to places she'd never mentioned. The food delivery notifications arriving long after she'd supposedly gone to sleep. The dry cleaning receipt with a man's shirt included. The identical phone charger that vanished after a single day. And now this recurring guest notation in her hotel bookings. None of it was random. None of it was innocent. I thought back to earlier that evening. The way she had turned the conversation toward the surprise of my visit. Away from the facts sitting right in front of us. That wasn't deflection born of panic. That was control. The direct proof, though, was no longer theoretical. I'd seen him leave. I'd seen the signs in the room. It should have been a moment of rage, but instead it felt like a cold, quiet shift inside me. Something had clicked, and from now on I'd be moving with a different purpose. Lauren returned later that night, not long after I'd finished brushing my teeth. She was still dressed from her client dinner. Makeup intact, hair barely disturbed. She poked her head in, whispered a good night, and left again for her own room. I sat in the dark a long while after that, listening to the faint hum of the hotel's air system, thinking about how many nights had passed this way without me knowing, and how many more might have if I'd ignored that restless itch to come here. When I finally lay down, I kept my eyes open until the red digits of the clock blurred. It wasn't fear or sadness keeping me awake. It was calculation. I knew now that the story I'd been telling myself about my marriage wasn't the real one, and I was just starting to figure out what to do about it. The next morning, Lauren texted around 7:30 saying she'd meet us for breakfast in the hotel restaurant. She arrived looking bright, polished, and utterly composed, greeting the kids with the same easy warmth she'd shown the night before. If I hadn't seen what I saw, I might have believed her cheer was genuine. We ordered pancakes for Ellie, an omelet for Jake, and coffee for ourselves. Lauren spoke about her day ahead, careful to keep her tone light. The client meetings would take most of her time, but she promised to meet us later for an early dinner. She laughed at Ellie's jokes, asked Jake about his soccer season, and kept the conversation from drifting anywhere near dangerous waters. If her performance was meant to soothe me, it only sharpened my suspicion. When she excused herself to take a call outside, I stayed at the table and sipped my coffee, staring through the restaurant's glass wall at her figure pacing the sidewalk. She gestured lightly with one hand, her voice muted by the glass, her expression calm and controlled. Whoever she was speaking to, it wasn't a frantic client with a problem. After breakfast, the kids and I spent the day at the zoo. I played my part, buying Ellie a small plush sea lion, letting Jake choose where we had lunch. But in quiet moments, standing in line for tickets, walking between exhibits, my mind kept circling the facts. The man, the room, the wine glasses. By late afternoon, we were back at the hotel. Lauren had left a note slid under the door. Dinner at 6, same restaurant. Can't wait to see you. The handwriting was neat, even almost too deliberate. That night, after we got back from dinner, I waited until the kids were settled with a movie before pulling out my laptop. I started going through our shared credit card statements, something I rarely did, since Lauren usually handled the bills. It didn't take long for the patterns to emerge. Repeated double charges during her business trips. Meals for two at restaurants in cities where she was supposed to be traveling alone. Rideshare receipts paired with hotel minibar charges on the same nights. And tucked between those, small purchases, things easy to overlook. A men's grooming kit in Denver, a set of cufflinks in Austin, a mid-range pair of sneakers in Seattle. My stomach nodded as I clicked through each month. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a rhythm. The following week, back home, I searched through the catch-all drawer in the kitchen. I found Lauren's spare keychain, heavy with duplicates of our house and car keys, and one unfamiliar key. Small, brass, unmarked. I recognized the style immediately, a self-storage unit key. The storage facility was only 10 minutes from our house, tucked behind a strip mall. I drove there late on a Thursday morning, wearing an old baseball cap pulled low. The manager glanced at the key, asked for my ID, and after matching the name, waved me through. The unit door rolled up with a groan, revealing a neat space about the size of a walk-in closet. Inside, I found two travel duffels, one black, one navy, each with duplicate toiletries inside, toothbrushes, razors, shampoo, body wash. A large fleece blanket, folded neatly on top of a clear bin, smelled faintly of detergent and cologne. Against the back wall sat a pair of men's sneakers, worn but clean, next to a shoebox that held printed photographs. The pictures were candid *TS. Lauren and the man from the hotel, smiling at various conferences, sitting together at outdoor cafes, once even walking arm-in-arm down a city street at night. The dates written on the back matched her past business trips. I closed the box, set it back exactly as I'd found it, and locked the unit. Driving away, the sunlight felt harsher than before, bouncing off windshields and store windows, too bright for what I'd just seen. That evening, I kept everything to myself. I made dinner for the kids, helped Ellie with her homework, asked Jake about his day. Lauren came home late, kissed the kids goodnight, and gave me a brief peck on the cheek before disappearing into the shower. I stayed in the kitchen, scrolling absently through my phone until a message popped up from an unfamiliar number. "Hi, I think we should talk. I'm Mark's wife." For a moment, I didn't place the name. Then I remembered, Mark was the man from the photos, the man in her hotel room. We arranged to speak later that night, after the kids were asleep. I stepped outside into the cool air, the phone pressed to my ear. Her voice was calm but tight, like someone who'd been holding her breath for weeks. "I've known about Lauren for a while," she said. "I didn't have proof until now. Last night I found messages on Mark's phone, your wife and my husband making plans. Dates. Trips. It lines up with the expenses you've probably noticed." I admitted. "I'm sending you *TS, she said. "Maybe together we can get a clearer picture of how long this has been going on." Within minutes, my phone filled with images. Texts between Lauren and Mark, timestamps matching hotel bills and flights, photos of them together at places she'd never mentioned to me, casual messages that read like the shorthand of people deeply familiar with each other's lives. By the time I hung up, I had a timeline stretching back nearly a year. This wasn't an affair born of impulse. It was a parallel relationship. I went back inside, sat at the kitchen table, and opened a blank document on my laptop. One by one, I began saving everything. *TS, bank statements, photos of the storage unit. I organized them into folders by month. It was tedious work, but it was also the first step toward something I hadn't said aloud yet, something I knew was inevitable. The next morning, I called a lawyer. The lawyer's office was on the second floor of a modest brick building downtown. Nothing flashy, just a brass plaque by the door and a narrow staircase that creaked underfoot. I sat across from a woman named Dana, mid-40s, sharp eyes behind frameless glasses. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You've already gathered evidence?" she asked, flipping open a legal pad. I slid a flash drive across the desk. Bank statements, hotel bills, photos, messages, and other items. She plugged it into her laptop, scanned through a few folders, and nodded. "This is thorough. If even half of this is admissible, it's more than enough to establish fault." We discussed logistics, custody schedules, division of assets, communication boundaries. Dana emphasized the importance of keeping interactions with Lauren professional and documented. Email only if possible. No in-person confrontations unless unavoidable. Keep your focus on the kids. When I left, the winter sun was bright but without warmth, the kind of light that makes shadows sharp. I didn't go home right away. I sat in the car, watching people pass on the sidewalk, each of them moving towards somewhere that wasn't unraveling in front of them. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I told Lauren. She was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling on her phone, a half-empty glass of wine beside her. When I said I'd spoken to a lawyer, she set the phone down slowly, her expression unreadable. "You're serious," she said finally. "Yes," I answered. "We'll need to work out a schedule for the kids. I'll be moving the finances into separate accounts starting tomorrow." Her eyes flickered with something, maybe surprise, maybe calculation. "So that's it? You're just ending it?" "I'm not ending anything you didn't already choose to end," I said. She exhaled sharply, pushed the wine glass away. "You're making a mistake. You're blowing up our family over you having a relationship with another man for the better part of a year?" I cut in. "No, Lauren. You did that. I'm making sure the kids have stability when it all comes down." She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms. "So what, you want to be enemies now?" "No," I said. "I want to be civil. That's why I'm telling you this now instead of handing you papers out of the blue." She didn't reply, just stared at me like she was searching for some weak spot in my resolve. The next few days moved fast. Dana filed the initial paperwork, and I set up a separate checking account in my name. I changed the passwords on all joint digital accounts, streaming services, cloud storage, the shared calendar, and replaced them with a new one strictly for the kids' schedules. Lauren tried a few different tactics in that first week. One evening, she acted as though nothing was wrong, making dinner for all of us and suggesting a family movie. When I didn't take the bait, she switched to anger, accusing me of humiliating her by involving a lawyer so quickly, saying I was overreacting. Through it all, I stuck to Dana's advice. Short, factual responses, no engagement beyond the practical. Then, one morning, a new thread entered the picture. I was pouring coffee when my phone buzzed with an email from a generic address ending in compliance and the name of Lauren's company. It was formal, almost sterile in tone. "Dear Mr. Carter, we are conducting an internal review of expenses associated with Ms. Lauren Carter's recent business travel. If you are able to provide any information or documentation relevant to these charges, please contact us at the provided number." I read it twice, then a third time. The compliance department wasn't reaching out because of me. They were reaching out because someone inside had noticed the same patterns I had. That night, after the kids were asleep, I mentioned the email. Lauren's face went pale. "They have no right to involve you," she said quickly. "They already have," I replied. "And I didn't tell them anything yet." She pressed her lips together, then turned away, muttering something about work politics and jealous colleagues. But the tightness in her shoulders told me she knew exactly what was coming. 3 days later, I got a call from the same woman who had sent me the screensh *TS, Mark's wife. She sounded different this time, almost relieved. "He's been suspended," she said, "pending the investigation. My guess? He won't be back." I thanked her for letting me know. She hesitated before hanging up. "I don't think Lauren understands how far this is going to go," she said. "This isn't just about you two anymore." She was right. The situation was no longer confined to our home, our marriage, our kids' lives. It was spilling into her professional world, into the place she'd thought was untouchable. The next weekend, Lauren moved into a rental apartment closer to her office. We finalized a temporary custody schedule. I'd have the kids during the school week. She'd have them every other weekend. Exchanges would happen in a public place, no exceptions. Jake stayed quiet through most of it, giving short answers when asked about the arrangement. Ellie asked a lot of questions about the apartment, about when we'd all be together again, about the old weekends when we'd go hiking or make pancakes. I kept my answers simple and factual. careful not to let my voice carry anything she wasn't ready to hear. Privately, I started therapy for both kids. I told them it was a safe place to talk about anything they wanted, even things they didn't feel comfortable telling me. I also began making small changes at home. I moved my desk into the brighter corner of the living room, replaced the photos in the hallway with ones of just the kids, and started a new Sunday routine. Morning breakfast out, then a walk somewhere different each week. It wasn't about filling the gaps Lauren left. It was about showing the kids that life still had structure, that the ground under their feet was still solid. Lauren called a few times to talk outside the scheduled exchanges, but I let each one go to voicemail. Our communication stayed in the shared email thread. Times, dates, pickups, drop-offs. No more. I could tell she didn't like the distance. That was fine. It wasn't for her. One evening, after the kids were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with Dana's latest email open. She was asking about finalizing the settlement terms. I thought about everything that had led here, the hotel hallway, the man in the doorway, the storage unit, the screech asterisk TS, and realized something important. We were already past the point of saving anything. The rest was just making sure the fallout landed where it belonged. The settlement talks moved faster than I expected. Dana said it was because Lauren's position was weaker than she'd anticipated. Between the documentation I had, the corroborating witness in Mark's wife, and the brewing trouble at her job, she didn't have much leverage. By early March, we were in the conference room of Dana's office for what would be our final meeting. Lauren sat at the far end of the table, her own attorney beside her. She looked smaller somehow, her posture more closed, the carefully curated poise of our earlier encounters replaced with something quieter. Fatigue, maybe. Dana went point by point. Custody. Alternating weekends, with me retaining primary placement during the school week. Holidays. Alternating major ones, rotating each year. Child support, set according to state guidelines. Communication, strictly via the shared parenting email, except in emergencies. Asset division. I kept the house, my retirement accounts, and my car. She kept her car, her personal accounts, and the contents of her new apartment. When we reached the final section, Dana's tone was even. All personal items stored in the unit rented by Ms. Carter are to be collected within 30 days. Any items remaining will be considered abandoned property. Lauren's jaw tightened, but she didn't object. We signed the agreement in silence. The scratching of pens was the only sound in the room. When it was done, Lauren slid her copy into her bag and stood. She glanced at me once, like she might say something, but instead she turned to leave. Dana waited until the door closed before speaking. "It's over, Mark. Now you start the next part." That next part came faster than I thought. 2 weeks after the agreement was finalized, I heard from Mark's wife again. Lauren's colleague, the man from the hotel room from the photos, had officially resigned. According to her, the internal investigation at their company had concluded with both of them being cited for misuse of company resources and conduct unbecoming. He chose to leave before they could terminate him. Lauren wasn't fired, but she'd been reassigned to a less visible role with fewer client-facing responsibilities. "It's a demotion in all but title," Mark's wife said over the phone. "She's not going to be flying off to conferences anytime soon." When I saw Lauren at the next custody exchange, she looked different. She still wore professional clothes, but her hair was pulled back in a plain ponytail, and she had no makeup on. She handed over Ellie's weekend bag and said nothing beyond a clipped, "See you Sunday." I didn't feel satisfaction in her downturn, just a strange sense of finality. The life she'd been leading was gone, same as ours had been. With the legal part settled, my attention turned fully to the kids. For Jake, the separation seemed to have solidified something in him. He still didn't say much about Lauren, but his grades steadied, and he started spending more time with his friends after school. One night at dinner, out of nowhere, he said, "You don't have to tell me anything, Dad. I already know enough." I didn't push him to explain. Ellie's adjustment was more visible. She'd still ask, "When are we all going to the park again?" Or, "Remember when Mom made pancakes on Sundays?" Each time, I'd answer gently but firmly, "Things are different now. But we can still have fun. We can still make new traditions. And we did. I started Sunday morning breakfasts at a small diner downtown, where the waitress learned our names by the third visit. We took weekend trips to nearby hiking trails, built blanket forts in the living room, and made a point of having one device-free evening each week where we'd play board games or bake something together. These routines weren't elaborate, but they were predictable, and predictability was what the kids needed most. I also kept up with my own therapy sessions. At first, they were about processing the betrayal, replaying the hotel hallway, the storage unit, the documents on my laptop. But gradually, the focus shifted to how I wanted life to look going forward. Not just for me, but for the kids, too. Lauren didn't push back against the arrangement we'd signed. She kept her weekends, sometimes sending short updates during her time with the kids, photos of Ellie at the park, or Jake playing pool at her apartment building's rec room. I'd reply with a quick, "Looks like fun," and nothing more. The distance between us was deliberate and complete. One evening in late spring, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. It was someone from the company Lauren worked for, off the record, thanking me for not sharing certain details publicly. "It's not our business what happens in your marriage," the man said, "but the way you handled it probably saved a few people's jobs." I didn't say much, just that I hoped they'd get their own house in order. When I hung up, I realized I felt lighter, not because of anything they'd said, but because it reminded me that my life now operated outside Lauren's shadow. By summer, the kids and I had found a rhythm. We planted tomatoes in the small garden out back. We had a running joke about how none of us could agree on the right amount of syrup for pancakes. Evenings were quieter, the kind of quiet that comes from absence but also from peace. Lauren's name came up less often. The questions from Ellie grew less frequent. Jake, while still guarded, had started talking to me more about his plans after high school. The betrayal hadn't vanished. It never would, but it had been pushed to the edges of my life. What remained in the center was the part worth holding on to. Two kids who trusted me to keep their world steady, even when the old one had collapsed. One night, after the kids were in bed, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and thought about the first moment this all began. The check-in desk in San Diego, the clerk's casual mention of double occupancy, felt like years ago, not months. I thought about the man in the hallway, the photos in the storage unit, the email from compliance, the final signatures on the agreement. It had all happened, and it had all ended. And now the rest was mine to build.